So, we looked at Elijah yesterday. We looked at what happened in that vineyard. And today we are on a journey with Elijah. I'm going to read from 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 to 6. When the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, the Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elisha said, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. The company of the prophets at Bethel came out to Elisha and asked, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," Elisha replied, "so be quiet." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, Elisha, the Lord has sent me to Jericho." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went to Jericho. And the company of the prophets at Jericho went up to Elisha and asked him, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," he replied, "so be quiet." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So the two of them walked on. And I'm going to leave it there because I'm only going to talk about this little bit of this last episode, if you like, of Elijah's life. And I love it. Scripture's so funny sometimes, isn't it? Don't you think? It's so funny. It's almost a farce. These two guys are going on. Elijah says to Elisha, "Stay here, the Lord's calling me on." "No, I'm not going to stay here. I'm going to come with you." And then they get to the place and the company of the prophets go, "Do you know the Lord's going to take him today?" "Yes, I know, but shh." And I wonder if Elijah is trying to get Elisha to stay behind for some reason. But then the schools of the prophets come out and they know, true to their calling, that Elijah's life is going to come to an end. And so they say to Elisha, "Do you know?" "Yes, I know." Shh. And there is this kind of hushed conversation going on. And I wonder if Elijah's amused by it. I wonder if he's hearing all these conversations and he's thinking, "Yes, I know too. It's okay." So they've got this journey from Gilgal to Bethel to Jericho and ultimately the Jordan. And each of these places is one of the places where there was a company or a school of the prophets. And these were men who were devoted to God and who served him. They lived in community. They studied the scriptures together. They called their leaders father, but they weren't monastic in their way of living. And it's quite likely that Elijah knew these companies of prophets, these schools of prophets, reasonably well, because in the time that he gets back from the cave and he's been recommissioned, it's quite likely that he spent time amongst these schools of prophets. He's been perhaps teaching them and encouraging them. So it's quite likely that he knows them well. And this may be his opportunity, taking the opportunity to go and say goodbye, because he knows that he's not going to be living on earth anymore or much longer. But the question is this just a farewell tour, the opportunity to go around and say goodbye to the people that he's known and spent time with? Or is there more significance to this journey, and in particular to the places that he visits? I rather think there is a little more to the journey. And in a way, actually it's really good timing that this is today, timing, the Lord and all that, because tomorrow we are going to be looking together, those of you that have booked in for it, a teaching day on emotional well-being. Elijah is going to be doing some emotional work in this journey. So they leave Gilgal the first place that they were at. Gilgal, I don't know how well you know your scriptural history, but Gilgal was an ancient sacred site. And there was a large circle of stones that had been put up there, and it was on the east of, to the east of Jericho. And it's where the Israelites had camped before they were to go into the promised land. They had crossed the Jordan as part of, and we'll come back to that story in a minute, they'd crossed the Jordan, and they, do come in, it's okay, do come in. They'd crossed the Jordan, and because the crossing of the Jordan had been quite a thing, they had picked up stones from the middle of the water and put them in a circle. Joshua had set up those 12 stones. And after they had crossed the Jordan, bearing in mind that they had just come out of Egypt, they had some work to do. They celebrated the Passover, and all the men who had been born in the desert as they had crossed the desert from Egypt, all the men that had been born in the desert were circumcised. Very significant thing. And when that had happened, God said, "This is the day that I have rolled from you the reproach of Egypt. I have rolled off the reproach of Egypt from you." So if we were to look at that in thinking about what might God mean by saying, "I've rolled the reproach away from you," perhaps he was saying, because there's a sense of separation here, I've rolled it away from you. I'm separating you from all that time in the desert when you thought you'd never get there. All those doubts and all those despairs, all those taunts that you would never get there. I'm separating you from the pain and the cruelty that you and your family and your generations endured in Egypt. I'm separating you from that fear and intimidation that you knew in that place. I'm separating you from the injustice you didn't deserve, and separating you from the label of slave to free. The Israelites had quite a journey, as you know, when they left Egypt. They had left Egypt. It doesn't mean to say that they were a free people. And I think God is saying, you've got your freedom, but you're not living freedom, and I'm going to separate you, release you from all that you have carried, so that you can go from here and be free. And not only was God separating them from, it means he was going to separate them to. And he was separating from their past and to relationship with God. So it's quite a significant place, Gilgal. Place of new beginning, you could say. A place where you feel the release of the past and you can start again. Almost the transition between your past and your future, which is quite a nice way of seeing it, really, isn't it? So what might Gilgal mean for you? What might that separating from, separating to mean for you? Are there things you need to be released from, let go of? When they were at Gilgal, they knew that there was a battle ahead. And so Gilgal was also a place where they had to prepare for battle. Is there something coming up that needs to be prepared for in your life? And in celebrating the Passover and doing all those circumcisions, they were re-covenanting their relationship with God. Maybe that's part of this place. Maybe that's part of what's happening for you right now, is a need to re-covenant your relationship with God. So from Gilgal, Elijah with Elisha travel to Bethel. We go back in biblical history now when we think about Bethel. Bethel was first mentioned in Genesis, although it wasn't known by the name of Bethel then, it was called Luz. And Bethel is where Jacob had that dream, you know, the angels coming and going up and down that ladder. And he'd used the stone that he'd laid his head on and anointed it as a pillar. Because when he woke up from that dream, he said, "How awesome is this place? How awesome. This is the place, the house of God. Beth-El, house of God. This is the gate of heaven." And Bethel was also a place where the Ark of the Covenant had been kept. I nearly said parked, but you know what I mean, left for a while. And people went there because where the Ark of the Covenant had been, there was the presence of God. And so Bethel was a place that was associated with the presence of God. It was the house of God. It was a place of worship, a place of anointing. And so it became that place of go-to when you're seeking God. Where do you go? Where's your Bethel? Maybe it's here for some of you. Maybe this is one of a number of places that you would go to for your Bethel when you want to seek God, when you want to reconnect with him. Maybe just go and walk by the sea. Maybe that's your Bethel. That place, that thin place that enables us to reconnect with God once more. The other thing about Bethel is that Abraham, well before Jacob, had set up an altar there. And it was at the beginning of Abram's journey with Abram before he became Abraham. It was the place where God had said to him, "You will have descendants." And they were childless at the time. It was the beginning of that relationship that ended in that amazing covenant. You know, you will have many descendants, and you will be a blessing, and you will bless. And so Abram, as he was then, had built an altar there to remember that place. So this place had then, that place of hope, that place of connecting with God, had become a place of worship. And as Elijah went there, I wonder if there was something for him about reconnecting, worship and prayer, seeking God for what was going to happen in his life next. And I wonder if he had to revisit some of the altars of his life, some of those places of encounter with God that had been figuring so highly in his life. And we can think about those altars in his life. You know, when he was in Kerith in the desert, and he had to trust God for the food and drink. And when he went to Zarephath, and he had to trust for the daily flour and oil, and then trust that the widow would share it with him. And then when the boy died, he had to trust God for that too. Carmel, he had to trust God to send the fire. Under the broom tree, that place of provision. These were all significant, and there were many others, significant places of connection with God in some way or another. I wonder how you kind of remember your altars. Maybe you write it in a journal. Maybe you have a stone and you lay it somewhere. We need to remember these moments, don't we? They are significant places for us. So I wonder why and what Elijah did there. That reconnection, that reflecting on those encounters in life that he had had with God. And then he went, it's quite an emotional journey for him, isn't it? This is tough work he's doing here. He went from Bethel to Jericho. Jericho, ancient city. Town in the West Bank of Israel. Fertile, bananas, dates, delicious things come from there. Place of fragrance, fertile area. But Jericho was what the Israelites were looking at when they were at Gilgal. Or at least that's what they knew was ahead. Jericho, you see, was a fortified town. It was a place that was in lockdown when the Israelites were at Gilgal. And it was in lockdown because they knew the Israelites were on their way. And so they had gone into a siege kind of situation in order to protect themselves. So from the Israelites' point of view, Jericho represented that insurmountable, I've no idea how we're going to get through this thing in their path. Have you ever had a time like that in your life where there is something looming that feels so big you have no idea how you're going to get round it, through it, over it? You have just no idea how you're going to do this. That was Jericho for the Israelites. And I wonder if Moses had a Jericho in his life. I bet he did. When he arrived at the sea, they'd come out of Egypt, chariots behind him, rushing down towards their back, and in front of him, the sea. No way through. I bet that was a Jericho situation for Moses. Probably felt like a dead end. Maybe for the Israelites in Gilgal, seeing Jericho ahead, maybe that felt like a dead end. We can't go any further, God. There's no way that we can do this. We just can't get through it, can't go around it. It's too big, too much. But where we feel that we are at a dead end, it's never a dead end for God, is it? Never. And if you read the Message version of Isaiah 43, it says this: when you're in over your head, I'll be there with you. When you're in rough waters, you won't go down. When you're between a rock and a hard place, anybody there? Between a rock and a hard place, it won't be a dead end. Moses discovered that. The people of Israel discovered it too. Jericho was not a dead end. And if you know the story, you know the astounding thing that happened when they marched around the walls and blew their trumpets. If you don't know the story, you can find it in Joshua. So we have to learn to trust God with these things, don't we? These huge obstacles that we don't seem to know how we're going to deal with them. We have to trust God with them and see what he will do. I bet Elijah could name several Jerichos in his life, several insurmountable obstacles. I bet the widow's son was one for him. How am I going to deal with this? How am I going to do your work, God, now that this boy has died in this house? Carmel, one man, all alone, 450 prophets, the king, one man who believed in God. The battle for his sanity as he fled to the mountain, to the cave. I bet that felt like an obstacle, an insurmountable, huge thing to get round. So what Jerichos have you got in your life? What Jerichos have you had? I bet you've all had some. Maybe you're facing one now. What's keeping you from the next stage of your life and the next bit of your promised land? Something getting in the way? And then, of course, Elijah arrives at the Jordan. And he has to cross the river, as his generations did before him. And he knows this is a place of transition, that he's going to be leaving the earth I'm reluctant to say die, because of course he didn't, did he? He had the most extraordinary departure. And you know, when people know when they're coming towards the end of their lives, as Elijah approached the Jordan, he knew he was coming towards the end of his, not in the usual way of things. But I've seen many, many people, when they know their life is coming to an end, undertake an extraordinary journey. They might not walk the miles that Elijah did, but they do something very similar. That sense of reviewing life, thinking about the things that we were proud of maybe, the things that we think we failed at, the regrets, the letting go, the reconciling with the things that we've struggled with and maybe got wrong, finding peace within them. That's important work too, isn't it? That also is a journey of healing. Can someone who's dying be healed? Yes, I've seen it. And I'm not talking about going to heaven, although that is healing, of course. I'm talking about the peace that can be found, the acceptance that can be found, the reconciliation with family that's been estranged, healing in many, many ways. So it's quite a journey that Elijah's been on, a snapshot presentation of it today. But I suspect that as Elijah made that journey, he found immense healing in it. And maybe if there are struggles in your life in one way or another, barriers, obstacles, regrets, there can be healing in those places too. This is a healing service. And maybe something I've said about separation, being set free from, facing the obstacles. Maybe you've been forgiven of something, but haven't been able to let it go. You haven't been able to forgive yourself yet. Maybe one of those strikes a chord. Maybe the Lord wants to do something today. Maybe there is something else. So I'm going to leave it there.